Prime Minister, today you asked business leaders, if they're so minded, to start making the public case for staying in a reformed European Union. But actually in June, your people asked them to shut up. What's changed?
Well, that was actually never the case. I've always said to business, if you back my view that Europe needs reform and you want to get behind some of those reforms, less bureaucracy, more competitiveness, making sure that Britain, with our currency, the pound, is treated fairly alongside the euro, if you back those things, speak up. But I think now we're getting closer, I hope, to an agreement and closer to that referendum. I think it's time for those who care about these issues to come forward, to speak, to help frame the debate, because this is a huge decision for the British people. And I think business, I think trade unions, voluntary bodies, other organisations, everyone who's got something to say about Europe should feel free to say it.
There was a communication failure at the time, because they categorically told me that they had been given an unambiguous message that you didn't want them to talk at that stage. But are you now asking them to talk because you're desperately worried that when the time comes you could lose?
No, I want people to speak up because I think the case for reform is so strong. If we take action to make Britain more competitive, to create more jobs, to make sure you can have a completed single market across Europe so it's easier to travel and create jobs and create wealth, that's a good thing to do. And so I don't want to hold back on that. Of course, some people want to come forward and make broader arguments about Britain's role in Europe, and I'm saying don't fight shy of that. This is such a big issue for Britain, such a big issue for Europe. I don't want anyone to go to the polls when the time comes without as much information, impartial information not just from government, but also from other organisations. I want them to have as much of that in their hands as possible.
And how big an issue is it for you? I mean, I know you've said that you don't think you have to resign if you lose the vote, but actually some of your colleagues tell me they think that's a bit of wishful thinking.
I think it's very important to make this clear for some very good reasons. I mean, first of all, the question on the ballot paper is going to be, should Britain stay or should Britain go? And it's very important there's no other question on the ballot paper. It's not my future or anyone else's future.
You think that would cloud the debate if it was about you?
It might do, and I don't want that to happen. I think the British people actually always answer the question on the ballot paper, and I want to make absolutely clear that is the question. But also, there's a more fundamental point, which is my approach has been to say, let's settle this issue. Let's hold the renegotiation, let's have the referendum, let's let the British people decide. What I'm determined to put in front of people is the best possible deal, so they're not having to choose between an unacceptable status quo and the very great dangers and the uncertainties of exit. I'm saying let's have the best possible deal and exit as alternatives, and then let people decide.
Now, the music on this does seem to change day by day. Looked as though we were making, or you were making, good progress in terms of your negotiations, but today we've had signals out of the Netherlands and France that they are not clear that there will be a deal in February. And you've also said that if the deal isn't right in February, well, it'll have to take as long as it takes. Where do you think we are?
I think there's been good progress. In December, when we had the big discussion in Europe about the issues Britain had put on the table, I think there was a lot of goodwill. A lot of people said this is not just important for Britain to stay in Europe, but frankly it's important for Europe that Britain stays in, because we bring, the second biggest economy. We're the largest defence player in Europe. We've got a network of embassies and contacts around the world. We bring a lot to Europe. But I think there's work to be done. A deal could be done in February. There's progress in each of the four areas I've identified. And with goodwill, I think we could get that deal. And what I'm saying very clearly is if there's a deal on the table, there will be no funny business from me. I will pick it up, I will take it to the British people, and I will sell it very hard, because it'll be right for Britain. But if it isn't ready in February, if it isn't what I want, and if it isn't what is right for Britain, then we'll need to take more time. Getting this right is more important than getting on with it.
How worried are you, though, by delays that push the referendum through to the autumn? Because obviously there's a concern one could see yet more asylum-related tragedies, and that could have a profound impact on people's attitudes.
Well, I think two things on that. One is, look, of course it's always good to solve issue, to resolve it, to get the British public to take their view. That's good. good politics, good for Britain, right for everybody. But let's be clear about this migration crisis, which is a very big problem for Europe. We have maintained our own borders. We are not taking part in the EU relocation and resettlement schemes. We have our own scheme where we're taking vulnerable Syrian refugees directly from the camps. We said we'd resettle 1,000 by Christmas. We've done that. And we're not going to go into the European schemes, and we're going to keep our borders up and keep our borders strong. And that will be the case whatever happens in terms of this refugee crisis.
And the Dublin regulations, they're not negotiable.
Well, it's very important, the principles behind Dublin, that you are able to return people to the country from which they came, where they should have claimed asylum. I think that is very important. At the heart of our system is the sense that you should claim asylum in the first safe country you reach, and that you should be able to send someone back to that country. And I think that's very important we maintain that.
But there is a fundamental issue here. There are two really big things on the agenda of European leaders. One is, will the UK stay? And the other is bringing some calm to this appalling refugee crisis. Do you think it makes sense to agree a deal that allows you to say, we want to stay in the EU before the migration issue is settled?
Well, I think that it would be good, frankly, to, I put this issue on the table straight after the general election with the mandate of the British people behind me, with a lot of preparatory work done. So I think it can be solved at the February Council. But I think there's something in common. Both issues do have something in common, which is this organisation, the European Union, has got to show flexibility when new problems and issues arise. It can't simply respond to problems with putting its hand out and saying, no, that's not the way we do things. There's going to need to be change if we're going to solve this problem of the refugee crisis. We've said all along, put aid into the countries where these people are coming from. Make sure they can work in the first countries they get to. Make sure you support the refugees in the camps. Make sure you have a strong external border for Europe. Those changes need to take place. And I think we're well on the way to getting some of those.
But just to be clear on this, wouldn't you feel a tiny bit vulnerable in a campaign to remain in the EU if this issue of the distribution of migrants around Europe isn't sorted? Because wouldn't you then be vulnerable to attacks from those who want to leave the EU that actually this fundamental issue for Britain hasn't been solved?
Well, I think we'd be able to say to people in those circumstances that Britain is not part of the Schengen No Borders Agreement. We're not going to join that agreement. We're going to keep our borders, and we're not going to take part in relocation schemes. And people know with me that is deliverable, because there was this giant relocation scheme, this giant resettlement scheme. We said we're not taking part. We're going to take the refugees directly from the camps. I think our approach has been vindicated, and we are certainly not going to change it.
We are living through, again, a slightly hairy time on markets. Lot of concern about what's happening to the Chinese economy, Brazil in serious recession, Russia, we've talked about it in another context, but Russia in serious economic difficulties. Investors here tell me they would be very concerned about investing in Britain if they weren't clear that the UK is staying in the EU. Doesn't that just reinforce the case that you've got to be able to make a clear recommendation for staying in?
Well, I think it tells me two things. One is, yes, we do live in an uncertain economic world, and the problems you mentioned are rearing their heads. That, to me, furthers the argument for backing the resilience of the British economy, paying down the deficit, making sure we strengthen the regions of our economy, keep putting people back to work as we've been under this government. Focus on the resilience. Second thing is, people have actually seen that we have an economic plan, and as a result, even while we've put this referendum and renegotiation on the table, actually the amount of investment into our country from overseas hasn't gone down. In many ways, it's gone up. The uncertainty hasn't been a problem because people can see in Britain a country with a pro-business government that's sorting out its issues and making this a great place to do business.
But with the twin deficit, still a big government deficit, much smaller than it was, but still big, and a big current account deficit on our trade and investment with the rest of the world, we're surely vulnerable if people think we're going to leave the EU and lose the benefits of access to the single market.
The answer to that is no let-up in our economic reforms, no let-up in the long-term economic plan, and crucially, delivering the European strategy that I've set out, achieving those goals, holding that referendum, and I very much hope with the recommendation that Britain stays in a reformed European Union. But as I was explaining to the audience here, this is all part of a strategy and part of a plan. And I think people respect that.
Prime Minister, many thanks.